Effective healthcare that engages with people in every part of society is one of humankind's great achievements. Advances in medicine offer treatments undreamt of a generation ago. And the concept of cost reduction through quality improvement is ever more widely understood.
Vi har kunnat se efter ungefär ett år med tvärprofessionella arbetsgrupper inom ortopedi att man har kunnat reducera allvarliga avvikelser med 30%. Man har kunnat reducera reoperationsfrekvens med någonstans mellan 15 och 20%. Och man har ökat produktiviteten med 50%. Och det har ju skett bara genom att professionen har satt sig ner tillsammans med patient och skapat de här resultaten.
In certain areas we've made big inroads. There's been nearly a 50% reduction nationwide of central line infections. Well, there are 5,000 hospitals in the United States, and so if we've gotten the infection rate down by 50%, that is a big hit, and there's no reason to think it can't go the rest of the way.
Yet challenges for leaders are formidable and sometimes invisible.
People in their normal course of professional life do not see many bad events. What they do see is medical issues, which seem to be far more important.
This lack of awareness can produce a dark side that is frequently hidden in plain sight. Consider this. A wide-bodied jet aircraft may carry 350 people. Imagine the outrage if some 300 of them were to crash in a single year. That would mean some 2,000 people would be killed every week. Civil aviation would cease to exist.
In spite of the horrendous overall numbers and the occasional sensational catastrophes, in everyday life, most people in most hospitals don't see a lot of things going wrong. The average physician doesn't see a patient die as a result of their mistake very often, maybe once in 10 years. That doesn't make a very big impression. So many physicians don't see this as a very big problem. A simple example of that is in America we write 4 billion or more prescriptions a year. And we and others have done studies that show that about 8% of prescriptions have an error in them, and about 10% of those result in some harm. But that's a very small number, a very small percentage of the total number of prescriptions written. So a physician writes many prescriptions and very seldom sees one that causes harm. And when he does, he says, well, look, it's 2 in 1,000. I mean, come on, that's 99.8% perfect. What do you expect? And we say, we've got to do better than that because it's 900,000 people who are having a mistake made. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. So one of the problems is that the problem is not sort of in your face all the time.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the Harvard Medical Practice study indicated as many as 100,000 avoidable deaths each year in US hospitals.
We looked at 30,000 patient charts, and the Institute of Medicine resoundingly endorsed the concept that medical errors were a very serious problem. They estimated that in the United States, 100,000 people, 98,000 was the number, were dying as a result of medical errors, and more than 1 million people were suffering injuries. And their point was that this was not because of bad people, but because of bad systems.
The real challenge for leaders, I believe, is to create the conditions in which there is a shared perception of the need for change without having to have one single disastrous event that prompts it. So, for example, one may argue that there are a certain number of avoidable deaths in any developed health system in the world, and that would be true. If these all happened in one day, the case for change would be seen as absolutely unavoidable, absolutely clamant. But because they happen spread over time, and the individual impacts on families and patients are serious in themselves, but not regarded as collectively serious, then the case for change could be seen to be weakened.
When we published the results from the initial study, we knew that the 100,000 preventable deaths was an underestimate because it was based entirely on review of medical records. And we were smart enough to know that a lot of what happens doesn't find its way into the medical records. I had friends of mine who would say, I don't question your motives, but that's just not true. I mean, what you're saying just isn't right. It can't be right. When people hit me way back when we started, I said, don't take my word for it. I had a big meeting where doctors would object, and I'd say, don't take my word for it. Go down to your record room and review the last 10 deaths of your patient and ask a simple question. Could I have done something differently that would have prevented this outcome? And I guarantee you will find at least one and maybe two in that 10. And no one has ever written back, say, I did it and I didn't find them. But they don't believe it until they see it in their own patients, and they don't really want to see it in their own patients. That's the problem, of course.
None of this means the USA is worse than elsewhere. It's just that this kind of research was done there first. In healthcare systems in such widely different cultures and political systems as Canada, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Australia, and New Zealand, studies indicate a broadly similar pattern, with harm in some 10% of hospital admissions. It's been said that if patient safety were a disease, it would have been at the top of our agenda long ago. But it's not. Why? The primary issue is leadership. Leadership drives the values of the organization. Those values drive the behavior of individuals. Their behavior drives the performance of the system. And that drives the outcomes. This chain of cause and effect is as certain as gravity, and attempts to change behaviors without first addressing issues of leadership and values are doomed to fail. Many leaders say they face impossible choices. Perhaps a perceived need to put volume before quality, to meet waiting list targets, while knowing that this could be damaging to staff, calamitous for patients, costly to the institution, and poisonous for morale. Yet there are powerful examples where such vicious cycles are being broken. Money is saved and reinvested in care, outcomes improve, and waiting times are reduced. This is vividly demonstrated when similar hospitals have sharply differing outcomes.
Studies of hospitals which appear from their situation, their staffing and their funding to be very similar, nonetheless show very different outcomes in their management of patients, and in particular in their management of emergency surgical patients, and not just by a small amount, by a factor of 3. That is to say, your chance of dying if you're admitted as a surgical emergency to one of those hospitals is 3 times greater than if you're admitted to another.
So if you see 2 hospitals that are apparently identical in staffing ratios or architecture or whatever, that have wildly different outcomes, what you know is you don't yet understand the underlying causal systems. So what could it be? Lots of things. I'll predict, though, given what I've seen about variation in healthcare outcomes for allegedly similar circumstances, it will be leadership. You're going to see a difference in the behaviors, signals, theories of action, investments of leaders.
Now, these differences are not explained by money, by the numbers of staff. They're not explained by the nature of the patients referred, although there are differences in each of those areas. They're actually explained by the culture. They're explained by the seniority and the speed of the staff that see those patients, and by the focus that they have on managing that emergency.
I'll just take a wild stab that a place that has, say, a lower injury rate for patients is going to have a leadership system that is more cognizant of the risks, may have more information about what the risks are, will be flatter so that the senior leaders, the boards, the chiefs of service, the executives, they will know more about what's happening at the shop floor, at the sharp end of care. You'll find the staff saying, "Oh yeah, I know the CEO. She was here yesterday." There's a sense of familiarity. I think you'll find investments in improvement skills and knowledge. I will predict that more successful places will be helping their people know and learn more about proper processes and about how to take ideas into action. That's my prediction.
It's very strange for all of us how we can just accept what's going on and not somehow see what's in front of us. And for instance, you know, surgeons, if you talk to surgeons about the fact equipment's never available when they want it, they just nod at you and say, yes, you know, that's how we work. But they don't sort of see it as odd, because it's always been like that.
In any other part of life, addressing a menace to human well-being on this scale would be a global priority. But healthcare is different.
The patient safety movement has been around for 15 years, and there has been an enormous amount of work done in an enormous number of countries and institutions. And the question then is, do we have any grounds for optimism that things are changing?
The question about have we improved is a difficult one to respond to for many reasons.
Deaths are not the only consequence. I mean, for every death there are probably 10 people who have significant injuries.
We have expanded the definition to include, would you want this to happen to you? So there are many events of harm that in the past were not considered things that would be counted, and now they're part of that definition of harm. So the target has grown.
There's been a tremendous increase in new treatments, literally hundreds of new medications, each of which has a potential for something going wrong, new devices, new procedures, new operations. And so medical technology and treatment continues to expand exponentially. And so one would expect that with all of that expansion comes new opportunities for things to go wrong. So that if the injury rate or error rate now was the same as it was 15 years ago, that would be progress because we hadn't gotten worse as we would predict we would.
We have a situation where outcomes are actually improving for patients in cancer, in cardiac disease, all the time. Healthcare is in many ways getting better. And simultaneously, you have a picture of continuing crisis and endless safety problems. And I actually coming to believe that the two are linked, because as standards improve, then our dissatisfaction improves with other things.
We've had some dramatic successes. We've had some dismal failures. What we've clearly had is a change in the conversation.
Det mest närliggande och viktigaste att få ordning på snabbt här nu, det är att få ut ett brett genomslag för insikten att vi faktiskt skadar patienter och många av dem i onödan. Har vi väl den insikten brett spridd i sjukvård, så kommer mycket av det vi ska göra att vara ganska möjligt. Samma saker är fullständigt omöjliga utan den här insikten. Så insikten skulle jag säga är det mest viktiga och det mest närliggande och det helt avgörande att vi ska få ordning på detta.
These tragic events, or indeed any events that one looks at, reveal the fragility and the vulnerabilities of the system. So this sometimes, as it were, wakes people up and suddenly think, my God, you know, I'm working and I just thought everything would go along fine. And suddenly I feel it's, you know, like walking on thin ice the whole time. And I think this can happen to any of us. We just take our environments, and my own working environment, I sort of take it for granted or things will happen. And you don't reflect on how, in a sense, sort of risky it may be.
Utvecklingen i Sverige vad gäller patientsäkerhet har under de 10 senaste åren sett ganska hoppfull ut. Vi tror oss kunna visa genom vår statistik att antalet dödsfall där medicinska fel och misstag har varit bidragande orsak har minskat, och minskat mycket. Vi tror att det här beror på vårt arbete med patientsäkerhet, men vi får inte glömma bort att den medicintekniska utvecklingen samtidigt har varit stor och varit en mycket starkt bidragande faktor. Ändå händer det att folk dör på grund av medicinska misstag och fel. Och ännu fler som blir skadade. Så vi måste fortsätta vårt arbete framöver.
particularly in the United States and Britain, but many European countries as well. There's been a great growth of not just interest, but expertise at making the systems changes that are needed. And so I think that although all of us are disappointed that we haven't reduced the injury rate more than we have, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, because we now have, I think, a critical mass of people who have the knowledge and the motivation and the interest in doing it.
There is now a global safety community that several times a year meets to exchange ideas for improvement.
We should rejoice in the good things that happen in healthcare and use those as learning opportunities to address the things that are the defects that we need to fix.
I have enormous respect for what Scotland has been able to achieve as a nation in health and health care. It's one of the leading examples in the world, I think, now. They would probably be the first to talk about the defects they still have and the unmet needs and the disappointments they may feel. But I'll tell you, overall, it's pretty remarkable.
At a national level, we have a 25% reduction in surgical mortality. We have a 17% in all-cause hospital standardised mortality. We have an 83% reduction in hospital-acquired infections. Critical care infections are pretty much historical now in Scotland.
Over the last decade and a half, healthcare has seen the truth unfold in successive stages. When the full extent of the patient safety issue was first revealed, it was widely called medical error. Then came an understanding of human factors, informed by the success of other high-hazard industries. From this flowed an appreciation that cultural change is essential. It is now widely acknowledged that drawing all of these elements into a managed, systematic approach is fundamental to long-term improvement. Yet fatal patient safety failures continue to occur in large numbers. Some are highly public, but most are invisible, except to those most immediately affected. Without the moral engagement of well-informed leadership, from the boardroom to the front line, nothing will change.